There is a sound a great hall makes when 1,100 people watch somebody step out of a line they are not permitted to step out of. The Chancellor was mid-sentence. I remember the word he was on. I have had a year to remember it. I came out of the third rank of the household with my hands empty and my knees already going, and every face in that hall turned to me the way a field turns in wind, and I heard the man at the top of the room say my name once, quietly, in the voice of somebody watching a cart go off a road. I did not look at him. If I had looked at him, I would not have managed it. I went down in front of an old man in a kitchen apron, all the way, forehead to the stone, in the full courtesy of the North, and I stayed there, in front of the assembled houses, and said the 11 words that were going to cost me a year and a day of my own voice. It started 4 months earlier, on my first morning, with a bow I had rehearsed for 6 weeks. I am Edeline. I was 24, and I came to Windle from a holding so far up the Carden Valley that we measured distance in weather. My post was under clerk of the household roll. That is the bottom. You keep the book of who is in the palace, what they do, and what they are owed, and you carry it about, and nobody speaks to you unless a number is wrong. I had wanted it more than I have ever wanted anything. I had sat an examination twice, and in the 6 weeks between the letter arriving and the cart leaving, I did what any sensible woman from a valley does before she walks into the greatest court in the North. I rehearsed the greeting. There is a right way to be presented at Windle, and it is a whole small science. The depth is fixed. The hands are fixed. You do not speak first. You do not lift your head until the king has moved. And if you are unranked, you do not go so deep that you look as though you are trying to be noticed. I did it in a barn. I did it in front of my mother, who wept, though she may have been laughing. I did it on the cart. By the morning of the presentation, I could have done it in my sleep, and had. Twice. They put me in the lower hall at the 9th hour with 11 other new appointments, and we stood in a line down one side of that room, and I was 4th. Here is what I knew about the Alpha King of Windal on the morning I met him. He was 36. He had held the Northern Treaty for 11 years without a single border action, which no one else in 200 years had managed, and his face did not change. That was the thing everyone said. Ambassadors said it. His own council said it. Whatever went into that man, nothing came back out, and every hall he walked into arranged itself around a man nobody could read. The doors went back. Iron came in. There was a great deal of movement, and I had my head down and my hands where my hands were supposed to be, and I heard boots stop directly in front of me. And I went down into the finest bow I have ever executed in my life. Deep held hands correct. 6 weeks of a barn. I stayed down there for what felt like a season, waiting for the shift of weight that tells you to come up. It did not come. What came instead was a silence. Not a laugh. I want that noticed, because it took me 4 months to notice it myself. 11 people in that line, 40 in that hall, and not one single person laughed. I came up. The man in front of me was somewhere past 60. He had white in his beard and an apron over his shirt, and both sleeves rolled, and he had flour to the elbow and a wooden tray under one arm, and he was looking down at me with an expression I could not read at all, which, as it turns out, runs in the family. Standing 3 feet to his left, in black, with his hands behind his back, entirely unbowed to, was the Alpha King of Windle. I have been asked what I did. I did nothing. I have never been so absolutely without a plan. The old man said, "Good morning," and I said, and I would like it recorded, that at this point I was still trying to save it "Good morning, my lord." Somebody at the end of the line made a noise into their hand. The King of Windle watched all of this from 3 feet away. He did not correct me. He did not step forward, or clear his throat, or do one single thing to end it. He stood there with his hands behind his back, and let a woman from a valley finish the whole exchange. And then he moved on down the line. Nobody told me. That is the part I still cannot fully explain. 11 other appointments, 4 household officers, and not one of them said a word to me all day, and I went about my first afternoon at the greatest court in the north, believing the presentation had gone acceptably. I found out at dinner. The underclerks eat at the long table at the far end of the lower hall. A boy of about 16 sat down opposite me, looked at me for a while with the fascination of a person meeting a celebrity, and said, "Was it you? Was what me? The one who bowed to Odo." "Who is Odo?" "Master Odo," he said. "He has the kitchens." I put down a spoon that I did not pick up again. "Then who?" I said. "Was the man beside him," and the boy told me, and I sat in the lower hall of the palace at Windle on my first evening and had the entire architecture of my life come down on me at once. I did not sleep. I wrote a letter of resignation at the 2nd hour and tore it up at the 3rd, and wrote another one and tore that one up too, and at the 4th hour I decided that I would simply have to be extremely good at my post for the rest of my life and hope the story died. It did not die. It is a song now. There is a verse. Here is the thing about the household role, though I had to see him every single day. The book goes up to the king's own hand at the 9th hour every morning, because at Windle the king signs his own household. 11 years, every morning, no exceptions. So at the 9th hour on my 2nd day, I carried that book into the map room and put it on the table and stood there with my hands behind me and waited to be dismissed from the palace. Cedric of Windle read 4 pages of household accounts. He signed them. He said, "Thank you," and pushed the book back and did not mention it. And the next day the same. And the day after. A fortnight of it. Not one word. A face that did not change. 4 pages. A signature, "Thank you," out. By the 3rd week, I had begun to think I might survive. By the 4th week, I had noticed the thing at the corner of his mouth. It is not a smile. I want to be precise, because I have described it to people and they always leap ahead. It is about the width of a hair. It happens on the right side, and it lasts less than a heartbeat, and it is gone before you are certain it was there. And it happens when something has amused him, and there is no possibility whatsoever of him admitting it. I saw it on the 16th morning when I said the kennel accounts were wrong, and he said they were not, and I said they were, and they were. I saw it again 3 days later. By the 6th week I could catch it every time, and I began not deliberately. I want that understood. It was entirely involuntary I began to work for it. If you want to know why the whole court of Windhall went silent, instead of laughing when a country clerk bowed to the head of the kitchens, because they all knew, every one of them, and it took me 4 months and a chancellor to find out, stay with me and follow along so you do not lose the thread. It gets a great deal harder before it gets kind. The king's ward arrived in the 2nd month, and his name was Ansel, and he was 9, and he was a menace. His father had been the king's cousin and was dead, and the boy was heir presumptive to Windle until such time as the king produced anything better, and he had driven off 11 tutors in 14 months. 11, the last one left at night. I got him because of the bow. He came and found me in the roll room, stood in the doorway, and said, with the directness of a small assassin, "Are you the one who bowed to the cook?" "I am, in front of everybody, in front of about 40 people, and the king was standing next to him, and I called the cook my lord twice." Ansel of Windhall sat down on the floor of my roll room and stayed there for 2 hours. I understood it later. That boy had spent 14 months in a palace full of adults, performing dignity at him, 11 tutors. All correct, all careful, all managing him, and here was a grown woman with no dignity left at all. Publicly, permanently, in a song. There was nothing he could do to me that had not already been done in front of the entire North. So he told me things. He told me about the tutors. He told me that he was not allowed in the kitchens and went anyway. He told me, on about the 9th afternoon, entirely without weight, that he could not remember what his father's voice sounded like anymore, and had been trying for a year. I did not say any of the things people say. I said that happens. It is not a betrayal. It comes back in pieces at bad times. He thought about that. Then he asked me what the roll book was for, and I taught him to keep a column. And by midwinter, that child could total a page faster than I could, and had begun correcting the kennel accounts personally, at 9, in ink, with enormous satisfaction. Lord Chancellor Fenwick had been master of the household and the court ceremony for 11 years, and he took an interest in me in the 3rd month. He did it correctly. He always did everything correctly. He came to the roll room with 2 of his men and a small book of his own, and said that a matter of protocol had been raised and would have to be answered, because it had now been 3 months and the court had begun to remark. The matter was the beau. An unranked appointee had rendered full sovereign courtesy to a member of the kitchen staff in the presence of the king. Under the ceremony of Windle, false precedents must be corrected in the place it was committed, in the presence of those who witnessed it, or the roll is in error. It is a real rule. That is the thing about Fenwick. Everything he ever did to anybody was real. The correction is a small ceremony. And it is not violent. And it is one of the worst things I have ever heard of. You return to the lower hall. The witnesses are recalled. The error is read out. You then render the courtesy correctly, to the correct person, in front of everyone, and the roll is amended, and you are struck from your post for the remainder of the year, because a clerk of the roll cannot be a clerk who is in it as an error. He had the date set. He had the witnesses listed. He was sorry about it. The king stopped it in open hall. He did not argue the protocol you cannot. That is Fenwick's whole country. He did something far more expensive. He said that the courtesy had not been rendered in error, that Master Odo of the kitchens was owed exactly what he had been given, and that the roll would not be amended, and that if the Chancellor wished to pursue the question of precedence in that household, he might raise it at the right, at midwinter, and take his chances. Then he gave me the keeping of his ward's lessons and hours, in writing, over the Chancellor's formal objection. And then he went down and ate his supper at the kitchen staff table, in the lower kitchens, in front of 40 servants, which he had not done in 11 years, and which he then did 4 times a week for the rest of that autumn. The court could not read it. Half of them decided the king had gone strange. 2 of the eastern houses wrote letters. I could read it, and I did not understand what I was reading, and it took me until the 4th month to ask the only person in that palace who would have told me straight. I asked Odo. I had been going down to the kitchens for a month by then, because Ansel went and I was not going to let a 9-year-old wander a palace alone, and the old man had never once mentioned the bow to me. He gave me bread and asked about my valley, and told me my totals were slow, which they were. Master Odo. Why did nobody laugh? He had a bowl in his hands, and he kept working at it. Because they were waiting to see what he would do, he said. What who would do? My son, said the head of the kitchens of Windle. I sat down on a flour sack. Odo of Windle, Alpha King of the North for 29 years, who signed the Mariford Treaty, who is in every ballad my mother owns, who abdicated 11 years ago and vanished, which is what the histories say, and the histories are correct in the sense that he vanished into his own kitchens. Everybody knows, he said. Everybody in this building. Nobody outside it, and nobody in it will say it, because I asked them not to, and because he has forbidden it, and so for 11 years the whole of Windle has looked straight through an old man in an apron. He set the bowl down. And then a girl came up from a valley with 6 weeks of practice and gave me the full courtesy in front of 40 people, all the way down, with the hands right. I thought you were the king. I know what you thought, said Odo. So did he. That is not what he was looking at. Something in me that had been embarrassed stopped being embarrassed. Because I went and got the roll book that night, and I looked at the entry I had been carrying up to that man's hand every morning for 4 months and had never once actually read. Odo, kitchens, no rank, no house. 11 years of a king signing that page every single morning at the 9th hour without ever once altering it, and never missing a day, and never letting anybody else carry it. I went up. I did not knock. Why is he in the kitchens? Cedric of Windle put down his pen. Because he will not come out, he said. I have asked him 11 times. Once a year. He says no. He has said no for 11 years, and he will say no next spring. And I will ask anyway. Why did he abdicate? And there it was. The face that has never changed in front of ambassadors, envoys, war councils, and 200 years of protocol changed, and I could read it. And I have never wished so hard to be unable to read anything. The Mariford terms went wrong in the 2nd year, he said. 600 dead in the Ash Valley, and a border we did not get back for 4 years. It went wrong because of a clause that should not have been in it. He was looking at the table. I wrote the clause. I was 19. He let me carry the drafts because he wanted me to learn, and I did learn, and 600 people paid the tuition. He took the blame. He stood up in front of the North, said the King of Windle, and said it was his error, and stepped down, and put the crown on a 19-year-old who had earned nothing, and went and asked the kitchens for a post. In 4 days. He never discussed it with me. He has never once let me say it out loud in 11 years, including the first night, when I begged him. 3 sentences, and 11 years in them. That is why your face does not move. A man who has stolen a crown, he said, does not let people look at him. I was 4 paces away. It was 2 paces further than either of us needed, and exactly as far as either of us could manage. You did not steal it, I said. It was given. You have held the North for 11 years without a border action, and every one of those years is yours. That is what he says. Then there are 2 of us. Fenwick called the right of precedence at midwinter, in front of the assembled houses, and I have to say, the man is an artist. The right is old, and it is dull, and it exists to fix the order of a household in law. The king names his people in rank, out loud, from the top down, and what he says stands for a generation. Which meant that in front of 1,100 people, Cedric of Windle was going to have to reach the kitchens. And there were 2 things he could say. He could name Odo as head of the kitchen staff and deny his father, in law, in public, forever, and every man in that hall would hear him do it. Or he could name him truly, which would put an abdicated sovereign back into the precedence of the North, and unpick 11 years of decrees signed by a man whose right to sign them had just been publicly complicated. With 2 Eastern houses in the room, already writing letters. Fenwick did not want the kitchens. He had never cared about the kitchens. He wanted 11 years of decrees loose, and a claimant in the East, and a king who could be read at last. I stood in the 3rd rank of the household with the roll book in my hands, and I watched the Chancellor walk the ranks downward, and I did the arithmetic, and I got the same answer 4 times. There is one more rule. It is the smallest rule in the whole ceremony, and it is at the back of Fenwick's own book, which I had read twice because I keep the roll, and it says that precedents may be tested from below, Any member of a household may render courtesy where they believe it is owed, and the household must then answer the question their courtesy asks. And the penalty for rendering it falsely is a year and a day of silence. Not exile, not the road. You keep your post, you keep your name, and you do not speak in any hall of the north for a year and a day, and if you break it, you are struck out for good. There is a sound a great hall makes when 1,100 people watch somebody step out of a line they are not permitted to step out of. The Chancellor was mid-sentence. The word was kitchens. I came out of the third rank and crossed that floor and went down in front of an old man in an apron, all the way, forehead to the stone, hands right, 6 weeks of a barn. And I said the 11 words. I render this courtesy to Odo, who was king of Windle. You could hear the fires, because I had just asked the question, and Fenwick's own rule said the household must answer it, and the household is not the king. Cedric of Windle did not have to open his mouth. He could not be made to. A clerk had put the thing in the middle of the floor, and the only 2 people who could answer for it were the Chancellor, who did not want it answered out loud, and the old man I was on the floor in front of. Odo of Windle looked down at me for a long moment. Then he said, to 1,100 people, in a voice that had not been used in that hall in 11 years, and had absolutely no trouble filling it, the courtesy is correctly rendered. I was king of Windle. I abdicated in the 4th year of the treaty, of my own will, for reasons that were mine, and there is not a man in this hall who has the standing to reopen it, including my Chancellor, who has been trying since the spring. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then a woman of the northern houses in the 2nd rank went down. And then the man beside her. It went through that hall the way water goes through sand. 1,100 people, to an old man in an apron, for the first time in 11 years. And it was not a ceremony, because nobody had called for it, and there was no protocol on earth covering it, and Fenwick stood in the middle of it with his book. I stayed on the floor. It was not humility. My legs had stopped taking instruction. And then something came down the hall and put its head down beside me, and the whole of the north watched the king's wolf lower its head to a woman in the 3rd rank of the household, who had just talked herself out of a year of speech. I want to be honest about what came next, because people tell it as a triumph, and it was not. Entirely, the penalty was real. And the king could not remit it, because it was my own hand that had invoked the rule that saved him, and remitting it would have made the whole thing a device, rather than a question. Fenwick knew it. It was the last thing he had, and he took it. And he was correct, and it was the only correct thing he did that winter. They closed the book on my name in the lower hall on the 9th day of the new year. A year and a day. I kept my post. I kept my name. I did not speak in a hall of the north from that morning until the following spring. Here is what a year of that is actually like, since nobody ever says. The 1st month is rage. The 2nd is worse, because you learn how much of yourself was noise. By the 4th month, I had a slate on a cord and a shorthand of my own devising, and Ansel, who was 10 by then, and who had learnt it in 9 days out of pure spite toward the adults, who could not become my interpreter at every meal. Which meant that for a year the heir presumptive of Windle announced my opinions to the room in his own voice, and with his own editorial improvements, and there is a whole generation of the northern houses who believe I am much ruder than I am. And the court learned to read me. That is the thing I did not expect. 1,100 people who had spent 11 years failing to read a king's face spent a year learning to read a clerk's. Because they had no choice, and they got extremely good at it, and by the autumn there were 4 members of that council who could tell what I thought of a proposal from across a room. And one of them was Fenwick's own replacement. He watched me the entire year. That is what he did instead of speaking to me. and it took me until about the 8th month to understand it was not pity. Cedric of Windle had spent his whole life being unreadable and had it done to him by a woman he could not talk to for a year and a day, and I have never in my life been looked at with such concentration. Fenwick was not executed and was not exiled. Cedric did something colder. He was kept as Chancellor for the remainder of his term 4 more months, every day, in a court that had all seen him lose, and then given the Marrowford archive on the coast, in perpetuity, where he is copying out, by hand, the full record of the treaty and its terms, and its second-year clause. He has 11 years of it left. Odo did not come out of the kitchens. He is 71, and he says no every spring, and his son asks every spring, and last year, for the first time, he said not yet, which the whole household regarded as a seismic event. He does eat at the high table now, twice a week. In the apron, he will not take it off, and nobody has been brave enough to raise it. The year ended on a Thursday in spring, in the lower hall, in front of the household, with the book opened again on my name. The first thing I said, after a year and a day, was good morning, and the King of Windle, who had come down for it, and who had not been able to say a single unnecessary word to me in 4 seasons, said good morning back, and then the thing at the corner of his mouth happened, on the right side, about the width of a hair. And then it kept happening. It did not stop. It has not stopped since. And there is now a whole court that has learnt to look for it, which he blames me for, correctly. The kiss came 4 days later, in the kitchens, in front of an old man in an apron, who did not stop working, and did not look up, and said only, "The bread is burning," which it was. It was 1 breath long, and it was not what I expected, which is that nothing in me caught fire. Something in me set down. 6 weeks of a barn and a year of a slate, put down on a flour-dusted floor, all at once. A year on, this is what my life is. I keep the role still. I would not give it up, and it has been suggested to me 11 times. The entry for the kitchens now reads, Odo. Kitchens, King of Windle, abdicated. He objected for a fortnight and then stopped, and I have caught him reading it. Ansel is 11, insufferable, and can total a page faster than any clerk in the building. He sits the household examination in the spring, which he does not need to and insists upon, because he intends to beat my mark. He will. And at the 9th hour every morning I carry a book into a map room, and a man reads 4 pages and signs them and says thank you, and then, most mornings, says a great deal more, badly, at length, because he spent a year not being able to, and has decided to make it up. I have never once bowed to him. It has never come up. I bowed to his father in front of 1,100 people, and I think we are all agreed that I have done my share. So tell me, was Fenwick wrong? He took a penalty that was in his own book, that I invoked myself, and if he had waived it, the whole thing would have looked arranged, and 2 eastern houses were watching for exactly that. Odo says the man was the only honest thing in the hall that night. I say a person can be correct and still be doing something rotten. We have argued about it for a year, and neither of us has moved, and I would like some outside opinions. Tell me your theory below. And if you want to know what came up the coast road last autumn, out of the Marrowford archive with a clause in it that nobody has seen in 29 years, because that is a whole other story, and it is not finished, comment the apron. And stay with me. Cedric and I are not done. Follow along, and I will tell you that one too. And wherever you are listening from tonight, if you ever bow to the wrong man, go all the way down and get the hands right. You have no idea who you are looking at.